Hey there. Welcome to week 66 of Supercharged Fridays. I hope you guys are well. A special shout out to all my people back home in India. It's a horrible time. Thinking of you, it's personal for me as well. So hope everyone is well and keeping safe. And we are here to talk about a very I will not say interesting topic, a very important topic, called bias, right? And I can't think of a better person to talk about bias other than Dorothy Dalton, who is taking time to be with us today. We are live from a beautiful sunny Brussels, 2 p.m. Dorothy is right now in Dubai, so it's 4 p.m. for her. And we're going to talk a lot about all things biases. If you don't know what bias is, you're in the right place. If you know what bias is and you've been through it through job in your job search, we're going to help you address it in a way that feels right to you. So without further ado, very warm welcome, Dorothy, to Supercharged Fridays.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. We have so much ground to cover and I want to get started. So perhaps let's, before we get into like deep into the questions, because we have a lot of questions to ask you, um, for those who may not be familiar with you or your work, it would be nice if you can tell us a little bit about your backstory
Okay,
and up till today.
I'm happy to. I call myself a talent management strategist. So I work with individuals and organizations to achieve success and individuals to reach their potential. My background is corporate HR. I've done sales and marketing, and I've been over 20 years in executive search. So I'm working a lot currently on making recruitment processes more equitable, more diverse, and more inclusive. So that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, more diverse and more inclusive, because we hear these words a lot, and you're like, yeah, you're living this, right? And Dorothy, for those who may not know, you are you run a firm called 3 Plus.
3 Plus International, and I set
Exactly.
that up specifically to create gender balanced shortlists for organizations. So quite often organizations put in a token woman, and all research indicates that that woman generally doesn't have a hope in hell of getting hired. So you need a minimum of 3 of any demographic to change the dynamic. So any minority demographic. So that's why it's called 3 Plus. 3 Plus.
Fantastic. I love it. Yeah. So that's very important what you said. You need a minimum of three of any demographic to make a difference, whether it's in the hiring process, promotions, or just to sort of have a healthy balance
In the room, in the
in
room.
a room.
So a lot of there's organizations called the 30% Club, or my company is 3 Plus, but basically you need to have a third, and having one person. So you quite often will look at a website and they will have a woman and a person of color, and they think job done, we're finished. Well, in fact, no, they're not.
No,
And
exactly.
and I've worked with CEOs who think that because they have one woman on the board, that is gender balance.
That job is done. That's what they
So
think.
check that box, we're done.
Yeah,
So,
and it's never done. It's never one and done. Dorothy and I were chatting backstage, and we talked about biases. And if you haven't heard it, Dorothy's been on my podcast a few weeks ago. Fantastic episode. It's one of my most downloaded episodes. And I said, "Yeah, Dorothy, you faced a lot of bias in your career." She said, "What do you mean faced? Like it continues to happen, and it happens for everyone. So if you're a man, you're like, oh, this woman stuff is not relevant to me. Everything is relevant. Everything impacts us. If it's not gender, it's skin color. If it's not skin color, it's your, I don't know, where you
age,
live, where you were brought up, whatnot, right?" So, Dorothy, I'm excited. We have so many people joining us from all parts of the world. This name looks a
great.
little familiar.
Yeah, hi, Vicky.
Hey, Nikki, good to see
I
you.
still have my own
We've
cheerleader.
got we've got
Yeah,
New Jersey in the house. We've got
yeah,
India. I saw somebody in Dubai as well. So we have
great.
Baltimore, Finland, Belgium. Nice to see you, Isabel. So it's like fantastic. I'm so glad you
Do you
guys
know
are here. taking time from your Friday. So, Dorothy, let's go. I want to know so many things. Let's start with bias and understand from you in the simplest terms possible. What is bias? There's a part A. We'll come to part B, but first, what is bias?
Well, I think the simplest way I can describe it, it's a system of classification of thoughts. So if you take that we have about 11 million thoughts a day, and research suggests that we only remember about 40 or 50. And if you ever find yourself going upstairs and you've forgotten why, and I don't believe anybody who says that's never happened, it's because we're basically overloaded. So the brain has been super clever, and it's created this system of storage to make decision making easy. And a modern way of describing it is as a hashtag. So it's a way of compartmentalizing.
Did you say hashtag?
Well, I use a hashtag. Some experts think that's too simplistic, but I found that people get it if I use that expression. It's a way of compartmentalizing. So in primal times, it was freeze, fight, or flight. And now in a 21st century knowledge economy, a lot of the biases that we have kept with us over the years, we don't need them anymore. And yet, the brain hasn't told our bodies that, or the way we live, that things are different now. And we still sort things out in very traditional ways that interfere with effective decision making. So they impact careers, they impact businesses, they impact the way we live our lives, basically. And I'm here with 2 grandchildren, and I'm just astonished at things like the roles that fairy tales have. So, for example, can you imagine how different life would be if Rapunzel was a civil engineer, or if Elsa was a climate scientist, or Prince Charming was a paramedic? I mean, our whole lives would be completely different. So that's just on the gender side, but we're basically deciding who to trust.
Who to trust. I like that. It's I like simplistic because it's a good way to understand a topic which I think, Dorothy, we could spend weeks on, and we're doing it in a few, like half an hour, 1 hour today, but it's something which is a lot more complicated. So what you're saying is there were, back in the day, there would be these messages sent to our brain, and they were quite simplistic, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Now, did you say 3 million thoughts a day?
About 11. They say about 11
million thoughts a day. And you're like, okay, I saw this, oh, the tea must be hot, or anything that it's like, okay, something specific goes to your brain and helps you to make a decision. It may not be the right decision, but it's a decision.
And they lead to stereotypes. Like, for example, all Italians like pasta, for example.
Or all Indians like curry.
Yeah, exactly. And so we make these shortcuts that lead to stereotypes, and then we judge people or make assumptions around the stereotypes that are in our head, and we don't allow for exceptions.
Yeah, I got it. And Dorothy, how would you say bias is different from prejudice and discrimination? Because I do know these things tend to get used interchangeably.
I understand why prejudice and bias get mixed up, because bias is a belief that is not based on reason, okay? Whereas a bias tends to be unconscious, right?
Bias tends to be unconscious, yes.
Tends to be, not always, more conscious. But discrimination is a behavior. So you might discriminate against a woman because you think women are emotional, and therefore you don't think women are able to run a team of men. Uh-huh. And that is that. So you cut them from the hiring. We're not having women. So that is discriminatory. Or you might say they're too old, or they're too young, or no, their background won't fit in. So that is discrimination, when you take action based on bias and prejudice.
Based on bias and prejudice. So what you're saying is bias tends to be more unconscious, prejudice tends to be more sort of conscious, like everyone from Honduras eats beans. Everyone from India knows yoga and does excellent at maths.
Yeah.
Things like that. So
So that is a stereotype. Prejudice is that you have no personal experience of that. You have no fact to base that on. So there is the element of reason in that.
got it. Um, and now tell us a little bit. I think we need education. There are so many types of biases, and everyone who's listening today has them. So if you are listening and you're like holier than thou, and I've never been biased, watch out, because everything that Dorothy said is unconscious. It's happening when you don't even know. It's like breathing. It's like oxygen. You don't know it's happening.
I've actually seen on LinkedIn recruiters put "I'm not biased." I mean, I think the most important thing is to accept that everyone is biased.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. The most important thing is that we need to recognize that we have biases and we learn to manage them. And I think Sonal is going to put out at some point, there's the Harvard implicit bias test, which I really urge everyone to take. Just to give you, for instance, I exhibit some gender bias.
What?
So I know, I was amazed, but very light, very mild. So it really
person, I want to interrupt you for a second. So Dorothy is sitting here. She's one of the leading experts on all things bias, inclusion, etc. And this is a moment. No one is precluded from having biases. And this person sitting here, you exhibit gender bias.
Put my hand up. So there's obviously something in the way I was raised that makes me think about certain things, but it really is worth your while taking some of the tests that are relevant to what you do. And there's a whole battery of tests. So that's really important. But there are over 150 biases, and I think
150 biases. So I'm going to put this link at the end of the broadcast in LinkedIn, because I can't send it to LinkedIn right now, but it's very simple. Harvard implicit bias test. If you Google that, you're going to find it. And it's Dorothy, this is something that anyone can take. It's free to take, right?
The only downside is it's not available on mobile, so you have to have a computer.
Okay. Small
but just test yourself. And I think there's another book that I would recommend reading. It's called Blind Spot. Why I think it's Blind Spot, Why Good People Are Biased, or something like that. And I think the stat from that is that only one person in 661 thinks they are more biased than their peers. So basically, if you say to someone that they're biased, it produces a very negative reaction. I mean, just like if you say to someone you're jealous, and I'm not jealous, why am I jealous? Why should I be? And people get very defensive. But I think when you open up the dialogue that says, okay, that might be biased, and people call each other out all the time. I'm called out all the time when I say something that's biased or slightly biased, or there are things that we all do, and it's about creating a dialogue around it and not to demonize the process. And I think the more open that people are about talking about it, the less of a thing it becomes. And I don't get it why people are so resistant. And I think probably it's because we have to change. We have to spend a lot of time doing inner work, and that's a lot of work. Inner work is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it means we have to change, and nobody likes to change.
Nobody likes to change. You're very right. Our primitive brain wants to keep us safe and be exactly the way we were. And gosh, you said something, I'm trying to remember. It was so insightful. The thing that you said about only one in 161.
No, 661 people.
1 out of 661 actually said, I'm more biased than my peer, which means.
So most people say, everyone thinks someone else is biased, but they're not biased. So when you talk, quite often when we do employee surveys, we quite often talk about what people have observed in others, because people are much more willing to talk about their observation of other behavior rather than their own. And we get quite different results usually when you're talking about assessment of others and assessment of self.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to highlight, what you said is very important, and everyone listening today, Please talk about this as well. We are living in a very dangerous sort of cancel culture, and somebody says something and you think they exhibited bias, they are blocked, they are reported, all bad things have happened. We're learning as we go along. We're not robots. We don't get it right every single time. So, the open thing that you talked about, Dorothy, you need a certain humility, right? And to say, dude, that was wrong. Like, I was wrong.
Well, not even wrong. I mean, you're not wrong because that was just the way you were raised.
That's
Or,
right. That's
so you're
right.
not wrong. It's just, it has happened.
Yes.
Now you need to come at it from a different point of view. So it means listening to people, being empathetic, understand, walking in their shoes.
Yeah,
And
I'm so glad you said that. There is no need, because I see people apologize too quickly. I'm like, hey, dude, you didn't do something wrong on purpose. You didn't do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't hurt someone on purpose. It just sort of happened, but you didn't know why it happened. So it's unconscious.
I think certainly the first couple of times, but I think if it's a habit, we talk about microaggressions, so the types of behaviours that different people have to tolerate, which add up day in, day out.
Yeah. No,
Women having inappropriate comments, or people having comments about their ethnic origin, or their age, or their disability, or their sexual orientation, then that is quite different. But I think that certainly in the starting out phase, when everyone's having that conversation, that there almost has to be an amnesty while people are working things out, and then okay, we've reached that point. We all have awareness. Now we have to move on.
yes. And today is all about creating awareness. Dorothy, if you're okay with it, can we jump into the comments? Because I see a couple of questions here, which I think will be interesting. So Hassan says, how can we distinguish between a recruiter who's genuinely unbiased? Hassan, we just said there's no such thing, and pretending to be one.
I don't think you can. I mean, I think that research, I just ran a short poll on LinkedIn a few weeks ago asking how many people, recruiters, had awareness training, bias awareness training, and only 46% had. So I think that you have to make an assumption that most haven't. And even then, it's not enough to go to a lunch and learn and okay, box checked, I'm done. It's ongoing work. So I think I would encourage everybody, and we're going to move on to this in a bit, is you can't change or worry about how people receive you. You have to take control of the things that you can control.
Exactly. Good old-fashioned stoicism. Focus on what you can control, and not think so hard about things which are and like bias. Hassan, is totally outside your control, even if it's with a recruiter. So Lauren says,
Hi, Lauren.
it's early morning in Chicago. Once you have the results, are there any recommended corrective measures, or is just awareness enough?
I think it's about awareness, and I like having an accountability partner. That having a group, and because it's an area that I work in a lot, we quite often say to you, are you sure do you want to reframe that comment? And you think, yeah, I can phrase this a bit better. So it's about growing awareness. It's about asking, having an accountability buddy, or being with a group of people who will just check each other and call it out without being offensive. It's just a question of ongoing learning.
Particularly, Lauren, and I'm sure, Dorothy, you agree, in the age of social media, right? Publish. Something doesn't feel right. Yeah. So if something doesn't feel right, it's not right. So I have done this in the past. I don't know if you remember, Dorothy. I've rung you a couple of times. What do you think? Is it okay? And you were like, yeah. Or, are you sure you want to do that? So it's worth it to do a little bit of a check, rather than regret it a little bit later. Or we're not saying censor yourself, but
it's about reflection.
Yes, reflection.
It's about reflection. Yeah.
I can't see the name here. It might be Bob, because Bob has a sort of a secret identity going on on LinkedIn. So this raises the question: AI, software, like we're going into slightly more advanced discussions here because we're talking it, from a recruiter point of view. But nevertheless, you have software out there, and Dorothy knows, which are created by humans, but they have actually got biased, right? I mean, we've seen it.
They,
These results
they
are
are,
shocking. AI
they're,
is biased.
they have biases embedded, and something that drives me nuts is that they call all these apps and things by girls' names. They are changing that slightly. But
Oh, you mean like Siri and Alexa?
Alexa and Sophie and all the rest of it, and let's call them Pierre or Tom or whatever. But apparently that they're starting to change that up a bit. But there was some research out which I found absolutely astonishing, and I applied it, and I can tell you it works. It's research that came out of Germany.
Yeah.
And it's based on automated interviews. So as we're doing more remote interviewing, it's when people are just being interviewed by software. And one of the things that they found out was that if you have a bookcase behind you, you get rated higher than if you have, I don't know, map of the world or a potted plant or a screen like I've got here. And I actually worked on that with a client who was called to an emergency interview. She had 24 hours to prep. We didn't have a lot of time. I said, the first thing you do is you put a bookcase behind you. And we did. And she got the job. I mean, I don't know whether or not that, and it was a CEO job. And so I don't know whether or not that played a role, but I'm just saying, we have background biases.
I highly recommend, if you're watching today, it means you're interested in this topic. I highly recommend following Dorothy Dalton's blog, 3+ International, because there is a name for it. And Dorothy called it background bias, like your background, like flowers. And we talked about it as well in a previous episode, but it is real. Like there is a real sort of bias in there. Fantastic. So let's see. There was another. Kevin has something that's called a confirmation bias, correct?
A confirmation. Well, apparently it's because all the coders who set up the software, they obviously come from privileged backgrounds where the weight given to books is, in terms of their algorithms, is weighted more highly than a stack of dirty dishes, for example.
Yeah. No,
absolutely. Or a pile of laundry. So it is confirmation bias. Yeah.
Exactly. And Tina is also somebody we know, and Tina's a recruiter in Brussels, and she says everyone has bias. So just accept it. No one is above it. It does affect your decision-making process. And Manmeet says, we had an interesting conversation based on bias and variance. Bias is the simplifying assumptions. Wow, it's getting a bit interesting. I mean, very detailed. Variance is the amount of estimate. Okay, this sounds like a real sort of quality green belt certified discussions. If we don't have any other questions in there, people seem to be really sort of enjoying themselves. I agree, Isabel, the bookcase thing, I mean, it's astounding, the sort of stuff.
I've written a blog on it, and I'll send Sonal the link, and it's actually called, bookcase bias. And there is a screenshot of the research showing how people with bookshelves behind them, how they're scored more highly. I mean, you can see the curve move. I mean, it's really.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, wow, that's really interesting. So, there's so many types of biases, right? So you said take the test, you'll have an idea, but there's, I don't know, 20, 30, 100?
There are 150 biases. So what you have to assume that every human interaction, you are going to encounter some sort of bias, right? The most common ones in an organization, a confirmation bias, so that is people who think like you. Conformity bias, where people, this is where you get this is how we do things here, culture. So when you're talking about cultural fit, and I've been in recruiting for a very long time, and I have never, ever, not once heard someone say, I don't like that person, let's hire them. not once
I
ever.
don't like that person. Let's hire them. The
Never.
likability factor.
So, and the other one, which is really important because the whole of our recruitment processes and organizations really are geared to this, is charisma and confidence bias. So we reward people who are charismatic, confident, and we do this in the recruitment process very, very strongly, and promotion prospects and going right through an organization.
Yeah, and when it comes to physical appearance, that itself you can break it down, right? There's data and old data. This is nothing new. Your height, your accent, which part you. So all of that sort of, which is, it's the world we
voice,
live in.
accent, height, the way you look. There are more CEOs over the 6'4". I don't know what that is in metric.
Yeah.
But then, so we have a disproportionate number of tall men leading our organizations when, everyone knows that if a bear came into reception, it wouldn't be the CEO that would be dealing with it. It would be up on the top floor. So, this is what I mean about some of the primal instincts. We're still gravitating to those primal biases that don't necessarily apply.
Yeah. And it's such a funny thing that Laurel is saying. This is a US-centric example. It's hilarious. Every news reporter these days is standing in front of their library. Madeleine Albright, Betty O'Rourke. So it's like, let me just sit here and show the books because I look brainy if I do that.
That's why everyone's doing it. There's a reason. And that's why. So job seekers should catch on to that.
That's what Tina says. Best interview tip ever. Put a bunch of books behind you and you're good as hired. So Dorothy, when it comes to specific things we can do about this, in two things. One is in our resumes, or if you're outside the US, it's CVs, or in our interviews. So let's start with the resumes.
Actually, can I dial back?
Yes.
I think it's about you have to start with self-awareness, and I mean my process. So it's about your goals, your vision, and your values, and it's about knowing what you stand for. Because when you know what you stand for, you also know what you stand against, and it makes it easier for you to draw your red lines and know what is important to you and what you're not willing to compromise on. Sometimes, we all have to compromise on certain things, but it's important to know where you will leave something on the table. So it's about knowing those three things. Then the next stage is doing your research. So if you do if you are not in a dominant group, which most of us aren't, then it's about doing your research. So it's about checking out the board of the organization, checking out if they have a D&I policy. Do they have anti-bullying and harassment policies? Look at the composition of their staff. Look at what their mission statement is. Check out their social media. Check out their social proofing. Okay, so if an organization is saying we pay for your Uber after midnight and you pay for your dinner after 9 o'clock, you know that work-life balance is not going to be important to that company, right? So it might be right for you if you're in a part of your life where you don't mind being in an office till 2 o'clock in the morning. But if you're not that sort of person, you may not want to go there. So it's about doing your research so you can control that and targeting your applications, and then you go onto your CV.
Got it. I love this. I love how step by step this is. I'm going to do a quick recap here, what you just shared. Very important to know what your values are. Don't bend because somebody tried to sort of mess with your values. And then you do your own research. So do they talk or do they walk? The things that they're saying, and it'll be very evident. And then you got to target.
And then you target your CVs. And I've known people who withhold information. There's research shown about people who change their names and they try and gender wash or whitewash or whatever. I don't do that at all. You have to be true to yourself, but you have to find the organization which is the best fit for you. And and I think one of the things that is happening, there is a much greater awareness around inclusive organizations. There is a greater awareness about creating processes that are more equitable.
Yes.
I think it will take time. I don't think it's anywhere. I think it's just starting.
Yeah.
But it's about choosing wisely where you're going to apply to.
Exactly. Got it. Got it. So, before we move on to the resume, we have a few people who've been waiting very patiently. So, Kush says, I was in a salary discussion process and I didn't hear back from HR for 20 days. And then I inquired. The process manager said they hired someone else and HR said the position's on hold. Could it be because of a bias for someone in this case? It's a bit of a hypothetical, loaded question. You never know, right, Dorothy?
It's hard. I mean, truthfully, it's hard to tell. I think what you have to ask if they would be able to give you any feedback, and to ask open-ended questions. To find out what sort of candidate was successful, how which direction they went in, and to see if you can get concrete feedback. Sometimes, particularly if you live in geographies which are litigious, where the litigation is quite common, you might just get the generic HR response. But sometimes you can ask in an interview. You can be more penetrating in an interview to find out what they're likely to be asking, looking for, how they're going to measure success, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And do not forget that, because Dorothy talks about it, I talk about it all the time. Interviews are two-way streets. You're not like, yes, whatever you say, sir, whatever you say, ma'am. It's also, they are looking for the right talent and you are it. So important to keep that in mind. And another question here from Chandrasekhar, who says, in the world of performance management systems, which are a lot like AI driven, can there be bias in there? Because I find performance management systems one of the most biased ways of the opposite.
Yeah, and I think they're massively gender biased. I mean, that's the first thing. So I think that it depends how much of the process is done by AI, but it's also important to look at the language that is being used, and to make sure that you get feedback on the substance and not the style, because quite often when people are trying to exclude someone from not in a dominant group, they will use style. So they might make a comment about your manner, your personality, or the way you deliver something, or the way you speak, or something that's not tangible. So you have to push them for concrete results, or concrete. Can you tell me when that happened? Can you clarify a situation? So, and you don't have to be confrontational. You just have to ask for the context.
Right. All right, fantastic. So hopefully that helped you, Chandrasekhar. Namrit's asking a question that I have been asked before on the show, but I want to hear your point of view, Dorothy. Psychometric testing. Do you think they should still exist when all these algorithms have been created by humans, or there's because biases are there anyway?
I'm a fan. I think you have, everything is imperfect, right? So I like a mix of competence and personality testing and preference testing with interview. And I think if you have structured interviews and a bias-aware group who are assessing a hiring process, that the combination of the two can work.
Yep.
I think what we tend to do is we rely solely on interviewing, which is said to be about 85% inefficient.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it depends which ones that you use.
They're not all equal, but the ones that I used to use, CEB, SHL, etc., there's a high probability, there's a high correlation with the results from those tests and future success in your company, because the biases are actually removed from those completely. And Rishabh's watching. Hi, Rishabh, in New York. He was on the show and we talked about how to research companies. And I love that you noticed that point. Fantastic. So, Dorothy, there's a lot of advice when it comes to what you can do. Some people say don't put your, graduation year. If there is an age related bias, or don't put this, don't put your address, etc. Do you feel like there's any point in thinking too much about that?
I think definitely don't put your address in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just a personal security, and I would say that to everybody. You can put, if you want, the location you want to go to, and particularly for organisations that don't want to pay relocation expenses. So if you want to move to London, put London. I think that in terms of graduation year, anybody who doesn't put their graduation year tends to be over 50.
Exactly. It's kind of, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't help. I think it hurts. That's my opinion.
I don't think it makes any difference at all. I think you don't put your year in. There are advantages. I think the advantages of, and it depends how their applicant tracking systems or the triage is set up, that quite often you're asked to put graduated between, I don't know, say 2000 and 2010. And sometimes there's a box to check, no graduation year. Whereas if you put you graduated in 1985, you might be cut immediately. And that was just something that interesting information that came out last week from different organizations. And it was, first of all, organizations are saying they can't get talent. Then they don't have, and that at the same time, the average number of candidates for any role was 29. And that to me seemed really low. So there's something not right there, and I haven't figured it out. So it sounds to me as though the profiles are too tight. So when they are setting up the profile, and that is when confirmation bias comes in, because they want people like them. And so quite often you'll get the hiring manager's self, as if he's hiring or hiring a replacement, he wants someone like him.
Yeah, exactly. I totally understand that. I've never been a fan of, let's say you're replacing a person and that person is interviewing. There is going to be some sort of conflict, implicit or explicit anyway. So totally understand that. Hey, Asif, thank you for the question. Check out the YouTube channel. There's a playlist with how to supercharge your resume. You're going to get a lot out of it. Fabulous. So, Risto says, some time ago in Finland, a test came out where the same CV was sent, but the only exception was the name. And it wasn't mainstream. It wasn't like a classic Finnish name. It was very seldom that there was an interview request. Risto, we've seen this so many times. My friend Lee, who's watching it, did the same thing. In fact, she talks openly about it. Her name is Paula, and she changed her name to Lee because she saw, and she spelled out the name of the company because she said it's sad, and that company did really badly. And I have a podcast guest in Australia whose name is Ahmed. And he talked about not getting interview calls. And then he changed it the other day to Adam Smith. And that video of his went viral on LinkedIn and put him on the map because people said, oh my God. So there was classic, but that wasn't bias. That's discrimination, Dorothy, correct?
I mean, that is, it's both. I mean, and they've actually done blind, that's why there is this move towards blind CVs. You take out the name and you only basing on competence. Yeah. And I've actually known people who've changed their names, and there is research done in the US where with blind CVs that they recruited more men than women, or they selected more women than men. Yep. And if they saw the names. And then others where they have had two candidates, and this was something done by ABC News. They had two candidates, male and female, given exactly the same questions. And even the women selecting scored the man more highly, even though they gave word for word the same responses. If anybody wants the YouTube link, they just send me a message. I'll send it to them.
It seems you have a little elf who's helping you out in the background, because you talked about that blog, and Nicholas shared it right here. So that's the blog on Bookshelf Bias. If you guys want to go check it out. Nikki's our super efficient viewer today. So I see other questions, but let's continue for now, and I promise to come back to the questions. So Dorothy, let's say I'm in the middle of an interview and I am detecting bias. It could be a little unconscious, it could be conscious, it could be all over the place, everything, right? And the questions start coming, and the questions are sort of they're making me feel uncomfortable. It could be gender, it could be age, it could be my MBA, where I did it from, where do you live, etc. um what's your approach to help this person
Well,
address it?
you know that I've got my favorite formula, which is what I call the CIA method, and it's nothing, nothing horrendous. It's about basically you start off from a place of innocence, so it's really
Curiosity.
important. Yeah, curiosity. So you assume no ill intent,
Mm-hmm.
and a very common question that we hear frequently is about childcare arrangements. And I actually had a situation where a husband and wife were interviewed with the same company. The wife was asked about her childcare arrangements by a woman. The man wasn't. The man got an offer and she didn't, even though she was more highly qualified. And so the way to do that is just to well, I hear you've asked me about my childcare arrangements, so you're just clarifying, right?
So C, in the CIA approach, C stands for clarifying questions.
It sort of stands for context. Context. So you were asking me about, have I understood correctly that you've asked me about my childcare? Help me understand what makes you ask that. Because they might have, we've got this great new childcare facility and it's free and you can just bring your kid in and drop them off. So it might be completely neutral. But it's likely to be that they're concerned about you losing time. And truthfully, it's none of their goddamn business. But I mean, you don't want, and I know because I've been there myself, where you don't want to be, the awkward, one.
Yes.
So that will get penalized, because women are penalized if they push.
Yes.
So then you just say, well, actually, I've got a stay-at-home husband, or I've got a live-in nanny, or I've got whatever, that you have no need to worry that, that my performance, and ask them, what are your concerns? What are your concerns? Are you afraid? And you can specify, are you afraid I'll lose time? But you've gone around it in a way that's generated a dialogue. You've let them know that you're onto them and the bias, and then hopefully that should do the trick. But it's about starting the dialogue, and that applies equally well to any other. It could be age. I had a client who, super fit guy in his late 50s, runs marathons, all of these things. He was asked apparently where he would be in 5 years' time by some guy who was extremely unhealthy looking and looked as though that he had health problems. And so I don't want to show a bias towards someone who's had health problems. And he just said, he went through that process. Well, help me understand. What are you concerned about? And yes. I think the average time people spending in a job is less than 5 years now. So 2 years.
Exactly. So Dorothy, the CIA approach, C stands for context, and I is
intention.
And help me understand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and A, I'm too used to being with small people. A is for action. So what action are you going to take? What agreement are you going to reach?
What a fantastic approach. What a simple, fantastic, put on your spy hat. Imagine you're the CIA, but do it in a very sort of partner type of way. Help me understand, sort of open-ended language, etc. And that should help, right? With questions that you feel are honestly none of their, I'm cursing again, none of their goddamn business. Whether you're a man or a woman, your sexual orientation, it's none of their business. It has no implication on whether or not you can do a job. Isabel, I'm so glad you asked this, because this is a very specific thing in certain countries where people say, they've put in the fact that they have kids or the name of their kids. I've even seen the name of a dog, etc. I personally don't know what relevance that has to Like, how does that help in any way? But Dorothy, what are your views on that?
Well, I think it's illegal in most geographies anyway.
Yes.
I mean, there are certain things that are illegal. They have no need to ask. The only time that I've seen it relevant was at a very final point in an interview process when it was an international relocation and they were looking at school fees and they needed to know how many school fees they were paying.
Sure.
So
that's not cheap at all. So
that's not cheap at all. So from that point of view, it was a factor.
Yeah.
I think if it's on some sort of CV template, ignore it. And then if they call you for interview and they ask you, help me understand, help me understand why you need that information.
Yeah,
it's
exactly
why, and there's the same process over again.
Yeah.
But I'd be very surprised if anybody's still asking for that.
Exactly. So hopefully, Isabel, that helps. Both of us are on the same page. There's absolutely no need to present that into your resume. So Prasanthi, hi, thanks for being here. We actually talked about psychometric tests as a little bit before. You probably joined us a little bit late, so do watch the replay if you can. I highly encourage it. Rushabh is talking about self-bias. Imagine the CEO founder of a company, and you ask yourself if you want your executive office on the top floor of a high rise or the ground floor. Is that like a societal conditioning of wanting the top floor? Our own biases.
I think that sounds a bit like Pretty Woman, doesn't it? Why did he want the penthouse? Because it was the best. I mean, I don't know. I think that I don't think it matters in the sense that why would you do that? Because I think there is. I noticed, was it in PwC? They've actually stopped executive offices now that everybody is going to be a hot desking, even the executive committee. So I think there's a move away from that, and it depends on what sort of organization you're in. If you want to be truly inclusive, you don't want to be locked away, whether it's on the ground floor or the top floor.
Yeah, exactly. And corner office and all of that stuff. Hey, Rodrigo, we are live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And our friend Shelly is here. Hi, Shelly. I've had conversations. Yeah, it's good to see you. I've had conversations with hiring managers when I was a recruiter that those questions are irrelevant, the ones we talked about earlier. I often told them I had kids. I showed up for work on time and did a good job. That often helped them to shut up. And understand their bias, right? That takes it takes courage, Shelley. I'm so glad you put them in their place in a nice way, because maybe they didn't realize they were asking that because you're a woman.
Yeah, and I think the issue is, would they ask a man? Do they ask the man? And I'm, to be honest, I don't have a problem with these sexist questions if they ask men and women equally.
Yeah.
And I think we know that we've reached gender balance if they do start asking men how they're going to handle childcare. And I think that will be, a milestone. But
exactly. If you guys go to LinkedIn and look at this hashtag, flip it to test it. Very interesting. The head of HR herself in Switzerland of a very large pharma company talked about how she had bias in her own team when it came to promotion. Kirsten Pressner, I think that's her name. Kristen Pressner, yes. Kristen Pressner. So check it out. Hashtag flip it to test it. Would you ask the same question if she were a man? And vice versa.
Just to qualify that, was that her bias, and she did a TED talk on it, was that in her head, she was valuing the requests for a pay rise from the men in her team. She was giving them greater weight than the request for a pay rise from women. And it was an aha moment for her, because she realized that she had gender balance, or gender bias.
Yeah, exactly. Prasanthi, I see your question in here. CIA, context, intention, and action. So that is fantastic. I have somebody who's been a little bit adamant on wanting an answer. Hi, Lakshay. Lakshay, there is no right or wrong answer with what you should study. I see that you're a student now. There is no right or wrong. Do whatever you enjoy. Short answer. We're talking about a little different topic, so I can't stay on that for now. Dorothy, anything else when it comes to interviews? Any other piece of advice you have?
I think that you have to have a sense of the culture of the company that you're going to. So that goes back to your research. And you have to behave accordingly, I would say, particularly if you really want the job. I think if it's an organization where you can't be reasonably natural in an interview with an organization, it is probably not the right organization for you.
Yeah.
But I think you show up dressed correctly. You don't have to, you don't have to be power suited and booted, but you have to be correct.
Appropriate.
Yeah, for that, appropriate for that. I'll give you, for instance, earlier in my career, I used to interview graphic designers. I worked for the BBC. And one day a graphic designer came for an interview in a suit. And he was cut. I mean, he was cut because what kind of graphic designer wears, like, he looks like an accountant, he'll never fit in. Anyway, he went on to work for Walt Disney. I mean, just a brilliant career in graphic design. So they made a really bad decision based on, bias.
Yeah, because this is the way accountants should dress, and this is the way graphic designers
should dress. Yeah.
And who really knows, right? Where these kind of rules absolutely come from. So yeah, I mean, recruiters have a part to play in it, but recruiters are human beings, just like everyone else. You do what you can do, and you control what you can control. So that is what I'm hearing, and I think that's Bob. To senior, seasoned, distinguished, those are fancy words for saying old. I mean, they're just like, people do all kinds of sugarcoating. If they want to say something, say it. And what does that have to do with the job? That's the question. I don't know, Dorothy, any comment?
Well, I always think seasoned sounds a bit like barbecued. So I just think you sort of take it out. I mean, you've got a solid experience in whatever it is you've got solid experience in, and you can, and it doesn't even, necessarily mean that you're old. It might just mean that you're older.
Yeah.
And I saw recently that after 40 in the US, it's considered to be discriminatory. But now that the people are working till they're 70, I mean, most people have only done 15 years of work.
They're not even halfway.
It's nuts. And that's what I mean about, we really need to change. And if there's one thing I could say to, if there's any recruiters on, one of my observations dealing with organizations who are trying to transform their recruitment process is the piece, I don't know, different organizations call it different things. I call it scoping. It's when you're scoping with a hiring manager. And if they come out with some 3-page thing of qualifications and personality, traits and all of this, this is where it starts, and you have to start drilling it down to what are the key competences for this job, and really, really push them down and bring it down to about 7 or 8 points.
Exactly.
And that way they might have more applicants.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this reminds me when I was a kid, Dorothy, when I remember I was 16, and someone said, who are you going to vote for? We had prime minister elections in India, and I gave this name. And my friend's mom asked, what made you choose this person's name? He's nice. So then I always remember that conversation, because she said, okay, so you're not issue focused. So here what you're saying is be focused on the skills, because that is the merit aspect of it. Who's suitable for the job, not who's nicer, etc. That is a message for recruiters, but even for people watching today. One day you might be in a position. Yeah, one day you might be in a position where you're hiring people, right? So this is a message not to forget. And Kevin, you're absolutely right. Bias exists in AI because the code has been put in by humans. Simple as that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. So there's a bunch of links which we will share. We already talked about the Harvard implicit. So in case you're joining us late, Harvard implicit bias test, worth checking out. Just Google it. You'll find it. There's a list of cognitive biases. If you go to Wikipedia, like this exact link, you're going to find a bunch of them. Be aware of them. And then there's The Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People, which is a book that Dorothy recommends. Definitely check that out. And my last question to you, Dorothy, what is the most, and this is a little bit unrelated, but you've been recruiting for so long. And is there one thing that you feel like, oh man, I wish I could say one thing to candidates, and this keeps coming up again and again, your most underrated piece of advice?
Well, I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier. It's the walk away point. It's to really understand what is important to you, to match the opening against your core values, what you believe in, and not to be afraid to walk away. And I think very often people are very frightened because they're afraid of, financial repercussions. But quite often what happens is that if you take a job which is not aligned with your personal goals, your professional goals, that you will find yourself one way or the other on the job market sooner than you think. And you will be really miserable in between.
And life is too short to be so miserable.
And life is too short. I mean, obviously, if you're, and I get it in the pandemic where people are really struggling, I get that we have to make compromises, but keep on looking. Keep on looking. Even if you have to make that compromise, don't take your foot off the gas, keep on looking.
Yeah, and options are underrated. So it's always good to have options and be in a position where you can choose, as opposed to I got to take what I get because there's nothing else out there and I have bills to pay. And that's not an easy position to be in. So we totally understand that. All right, fantastic. So we have covered so much stuff today. Please definitely check out Dorothy, follow her on LinkedIn, and there's a bunch of blogs on 3Plus International. We talked about what are the types of biases. How do you address biases in resumes, interviews, etc. So I want to, if you guys can sort of give us a lot of applause, because Dorothy's taken out time. She is in Dubai with her family and working. It's a Friday afternoon, which is the start of, I think it's already the weekend in Dubai,
it's
right?
The weekend, yeah,
it's Friday and Saturday is the weekend. So thank you so much. And thanks so much, Dorothy, for being with us today.
Interesting questions. So really appreciated that. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Take care of yourselves. Heart goes out to anybody out there who's, in a little bit of, trouble with their health. Lots of warm thoughts and good vibes. And see you guys next Friday. Next Friday, I have a session on sales with a very lovely person called Jules White. And sales and job search are not that different. And she's going to help us with sales skills we need in interviews. Thanks so much for guys. Take care of yourselves and see you next
Stay safe.
Friday.
Bye-bye.